21, 1959, 6:09 a.m. The room is already settled when the silence arrives. Not calm, not peaceful. Settled, like dust after something heavy has been placed down without warning. Bumpy Johnson sits where he always sits. Not the center, never the center, just far enough back that people have to turn their heads to acknowledge him. The chair beneath him didn't scrape the floor when he sat. Someone made sure of that earlier. Someone always does. There are empty seats along the wall. No one asks who they're for. A glass sweats on the table in front of him. The water inside hasn't been touched. Condensation gathers, then slides down the side, slow and patient. Time is moving. Everyone can feel it. The sentence has already been spoken. That's the problem. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even meant to start a fight. "Ain't it funny," the man said, leaning back just enough to be seen, "how time makes room for new people?" He didn't say Bumpy's name. No one needed him to. The words weren't thrown. They were placed. Soft, careful, designed to sound harmless to anyone who didn't belong in the room. But everyone here belongs. Bumpy hears it. Of course he does. He hears everything. He doesn't react, doesn't lift his head, doesn't tighten his jaw. His hands stay folded. His breathing doesn't change. That's when the room starts to feel wrong. Because anger would be familiar, correction would be expected. Violence would at least give people something to measure. Silence gives them nothing. Someone shifts their weight. A chair creaks. The sound lands heavier than it should. A man near the wall clears his throat and immediately regrets it, like he's interrupted something sacred. Bumpy raises his eyes, not to the speaker, to the clock. It hangs crooked, slightly off level, like no one ever got around to fixing it. The second hand ticks forward, loud enough now that people are counting without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. Across the table, the man who spoke first begins to understand his mistake. His smile fades in pieces. First the corners, then the confidence behind it. He straightens in his chair, suddenly aware of how exposed he is. He opens his mouth, considering whether to soften the moment. He doesn't, because explaining would mean admitting the comment was intentional, and intention turns disrespect into declaration. Bumpy finally looks at him. It's not a glare. It's not a challenge. It's a check, like counting money, like making sure something is real. Then Bumpy looks away. That's when the room shifts. The insult hasn't been answered, but it hasn't been forgiven either. It's been set aside, catalogued, stored. Men glance toward the exits, not to leave, just to know where they are. A few straighten their jackets. One man places both hands flat on the table, grounding himself. Outside, a patrol car idles at the curb. The officer inside doesn't get out. He's been there longer than protocol suggests. Long enough to be noticed. Long enough to pretend he's waiting for something that hasn't happened yet. He watches the building. Not the door, the windows. He's waiting for sound. There is none. Inside, Bumpy shifts slightly in his chair. Not forward, not back. Just enough to remind the room that he is present and still deciding. No instructions are given. No orders spoken. That's how authority works when it's real. The man who made the comment avoids Bumpy's eyes now. He studies the table, the glass, anything that isn't the silence sitting between them. Someone else speaks, not to change the subject, just to keep the air moving. The words are harmless, necessary. Everyone knows they don't matter. Bumpy doesn't join in. He listens. He always listens longer than people expect. Across the street, the patrol car's engine cuts off. The officer steps out, stretches his legs, then leans back against the door. He lights a cigarette. No urgency. No radio call. He doesn't want to be the first to move. Authority never does when it senses balance instead of chaos. Back inside, the conversation drifts. Carefully, respectfully, every word weighed, every laugh shortened. The insult is still there, unanswered. That's what gives it power, because everyone understands now the decision has already been made, not about punishment, about standing, about who controls the room without raising his voice. Bumpy stands, not suddenly, not dramatically. Chairs don't scrape. No one flinches. He adjusts his coat, smooths the sleeve, and nods once, not to anyone in particular. The room responds instantly. Men rise. Conversations stop. Space opens where it needs to, not because he demands it, because no one wants to be in the way of what comes next. He walks past the man who spoke, doesn't look at him. That's the final lesson. Outside, the officer watches Bumpy exit. He straightens without meaning to. He considers saying something. He doesn't. Bumpy walks past the patrol car without slowing. No words exchanged. No acknowledgement needed. The officer exhales smoke and looks away, already deciding how to explain later that nothing happened. Inside, the room remains quiet long after Bumpy is gone. The silence stays. It has weight now, and everyone feels it. Morning comes to Harlem without ceremony. No headlines, no sirens, no bodies in the street to explain why the air feels tighter than it did the night before. Shop gates lift slower than usual. Not delayed, just careful. The metal rattles, then settles. A few owners pause with their hands still on the bars, listening to nothing in particular. They already know. News doesn't travel here like a message. It moves like a change in pressure. Bumpy Johnson hasn't been seen since last night. That doesn't matter. Presence isn't required when reputation has learned how to stand on its own. Harlem wakes with the understanding that something has shifted subtly but decisively. Men speak in shorter sentences. Women lower their voices without being told. Eyes linger a second longer on doorways, on corners, on reflections in shop windows. No one asks what happened. Asking would suggest uncertainty. There is none. A butcher on 135th adjusts the meat in his window twice, though it was already straight. He glances toward the street, then back to his work. A man waiting for change pretends not to notice. He does notice. Everyone does. A delivery truck idles longer than necessary outside a dry cleaner's. The driver checks his manifest again. Same route as always. Same stops. Still, he waits for a signal that never comes. Eventually, he goes inside. He leaves the engine running. Caution looks like routine when you know how to disguise it. By mid-morning, the rhythm has altered just enough to be felt. Not enough to alarm anyone from the outside. That's important. Harlem knows when to keep things invisible. On a stoop near Lenox, two men sit with coffee cups they aren't drinking from. They talk about baseball, about the weather, about nothing that matters. Their eyes follow every unfamiliar face. When someone new passes, conversation pauses, resumes only after the stranger is gone. No instructions have been issued. None are needed. This is loyalty without language. Bumpy's authority doesn't announce itself. It's inherited, remembered, reinforced by years of knowing who he is when he doesn't have to prove it. Silence from a man like that doesn't signal weakness. It signals expectation. At a bar that won't open for hours, chairs are set differently than usual. One table is left empty on purpose. No sign explains why. It doesn't have to. The bartender wipes the same spot on the counter twice, then stops when he realizes he's doing it. Across town, a man who laughed too loudly last night stays home. He tells himself he's tired. He tells his wife he doesn't feel right. She doesn't argue. She already knows not to push on days like this. Harlem is good at reading days. By noon, authority has noticed. They don't acknowledge it openly. They never do. But radios stay quieter. Patrols stretch their routes without meaning to. Officers linger at intersections they don't usually linger at, then move on without incident. No one is looking for trouble. That's the point. Trouble would mean something went wrong. What's happening now is balance reasserting itself. In a small office with blinds half drawn, a man in a pressed shirt reads a report twice. There's nothing alarming in it. No crime spike. No calls. No names mentioned that shouldn't be. Still, he taps his pen against the desk, slow, thoughtful. He files the paper away. Better to wait. Institutions understand patience when they're dealing with men who don't rush. Back on the street, a boy runs too fast past a group of older men and slows himself without being told. He looks back, embarrassed. One of them nods, not approval, not warning. Recognition. You're learning. That's how Harlem teaches. A rumor tries to start around mid-afternoon. It doesn't get far. It stumbles, contradicts itself, dies quietly. People aren't interested in versions today. They're interested in outcomes, and outcomes take time. A phone rings somewhere and isn't answered. Another rings and is. The conversations are short, polite, careful. No one raises their voice. No one commits to anything they don't have to. The city is holding its breath without realizing it. By evening, it's clear. Nothing is going to happen loudly. That's when people begin to worry. Because loud events draw lines. Quiet ones redraw them. A man who considers himself important walks into a place he shouldn't have. He feels it immediately. The room doesn't stop. It adjusts. Shoulders turn slightly. Space narrows where he stands. He finishes his drink faster than planned and leaves without saying goodbye. No one follows him. They don't need to. Authority drives by twice in 1 hour. Same car, same speed, windows down. They're listening for noise that doesn't come. The absence frustrates them. Paperwork prefers incidents. Courts like clarity. This is neither. This is influence settling into place. As night returns, Harlem looks normal again to anyone who doesn't belong to it. Lights glow. Music drifts from open windows. Laughter resurfaces in controlled amounts. But beneath it, the understanding remains. Bumpy Johnson stayed silent. And silence, when carried by a man like that, becomes instruction. No one challenges it. No one tests it. Because everyone knows. When restraint is chosen publicly, response arrives privately. And when it does, it won't ask permission. Somewhere, authority decides to stand down before they ever stood up. Reports are softened. Timelines extended. Attention redirected elsewhere. It's easier to explain inactivity when nothing explodes. They tell themselves they're being cautious. They are, but not for the reasons they'll admit. Harlem settles into the night, loyal to a man who didn't need to speak to be heard. The neighborhood doesn't celebrate. It doesn't mourn. It simply adjusts like it always has when power confirms itself without violence. The silence remains intact, and everyone understands what it means. The pressure doesn't arrive with footsteps. It comes through pauses in conversation, through calls that don't connect, through doors that stay open a little longer than usual. Bumpy Johnson is not in the room when the first message is delivered. That's intentional. Messages meant for men like him rarely arrive directly. They circle first. They test the space. They look for edges to push against. A man speaks to another man who speaks to someone else. The words soften as they travel. By the time they land where they're meant to, they sound almost friendly. Almost. This is just concern, the voice says. No one's saying there's a problem. That's how pressure introduces itself when it doesn't want to be identified. Bumpy hears about it later, not from the messenger, from the absence left behind, the way people avoid certain topics, the way questions are asked, then quietly withdrawn. He listens. He always listens longer than anyone expects. Somewhere across the city, someone decides the silence has lasted long enough. Not Bumpy. Never Bumpy. Someone else. Someone impatient. Someone who mistakes quiet for opportunity. A door opens that shouldn't. A conversation happens that should have waited. Still, no names are used. That's the rule now. The pressure doesn't have a face. It doesn't need one. It relies on implication, on suggestion, on the idea that time is doing work that people don't want to do themselves. Bumpy understands the strategy immediately. If you can't confront power, you try to age it. He doesn't react. That frustrates them. At a cafe with a cracked mirror behind the counter, two men sit too close together. Their voices are low. Their confidence isn't. They talk about change, about new ways of doing things, about how silence can be misunderstood. They never say his name. They don't have to. A third man listens from 2 tables away. He finishes his coffee slowly, leaves exact change. He doesn't remember their faces. He remembers their tone. That's what matters. By mid-afternoon, the pressure has spread enough to feel coordinated, but not enough to be traced. That's the danger of it. Nothing solid to respond to, nothing concrete to correct, just atmosphere. Authority notices the shift before anyone admits it exists. Files move from one desk to another. A meeting is postponed. A signature waits an extra day. No official reason is given. There never is. Institutions don't like to rush when uncertainty enters the room. They've learned that patience looks neutral on paper. Bumpy moves through the day unseen, not hiding, just unannounced. He visits places without stopping, watches without being watched. His presence registers only after he's gone. A man greets him too eagerly and corrects himself halfway through the greeting. Another offers information that wasn't requested. Bumpy takes neither reaction personally. He files them away. Pressure is only effective when it's acknowledged. Late afternoon brings a call that rings longer than it should. When it's answered, the voice on the other end sounds careful, respectful, too careful. There's talk, the voice says. Bumpy doesn't ask where or by whom. He already knows. Some people think the quiet is open space. The pause that follows is deliberate, a test. Bumpy lets it sit. The man on the line shifts his weight. Even though Bumpy can't see him, he fills the silence with unnecessary clarification. That's when Bumpy speaks. Once. Time isn't empty, he says. Then the line goes dead, that's all. No threat, no warning, just correction. The pressure stalls for a moment after that. Not because it's gone, but because it's recalibrating. Those applying it need reassurance. They need to believe they're not exposed. They never are. Not yet. Evening settles in and Harlem moves into its second rhythm. Lights come on. Music returns in measured amounts. People behave normally because normalcy is useful. It hides intention. Bumpy sits alone in a room that doesn't belong to him. It doesn't need to. He occupies it without ownership. The chair across from him stays empty. That's intentional too. Empty chairs send messages. A knock comes that isn't a knock, more of a presence, someone standing close enough to be noticed. Bumpy doesn't look up. The door opens anyway. A man enters who believes he's being brave. He speaks carefully, choosing words that sound cooperative. He frames pressure as opportunity, suggests alignment, talks about the future as if it's undecided. Bumpy lets him finish. When the man stops talking, the room doesn't respond. Bumpy waits longer than required, long enough for the visitor to wonder if he's misjudged the moment. Finally, Bumpy stands, not abruptly, not aggressively. He walks past the man without acknowledging him, pauses at the door, speaks without turning around. "You should be careful who you bring other people's thoughts to," he says. The man opens his mouth to respond. Bumpy is already gone. The message lands harder because it doesn't explain itself. Outside, authority observes movement without context. A few men relocate. Others disappear for a night. Nothing actionable. Nothing reportable. Nothing reportable. They prefer it that way. Pressure without a face is difficult to confront, but it's also difficult to sustain. It needs reaction. It needs resistance to justify itself. Bumpy offers neither. By nightfall, the pressure has begun to turn inward. Those applying it start to doubt each other. Was the silence strategic or dismissive? Was it restraint or preparation? They don't know. That uncertainty becomes its own weight. Somewhere, someone decides to wait. Another decides to speak less. Another decides to steep back entirely. Pressure fragments when it isn't met. Bumpy remains still, not inactive, still. There's a difference, and everyone who matters understands it. Authority writes nothing down that night. They don't need to. Nothing has crossed the line that requires record. That's the genius of what's happening. Control without confrontation leaves no evidence. It leaves memory, and memory travels further than reports ever do. The city settles again, uneasy but intact. The pressure hasn't vanished. It's simply lost its direction. Without a face, it has nowhere to land. Bumpy Johnson doesn't need to chase it. Time will bring it back or bury it. Either way, he's already decided how long he's willing to wait. The place is louder than it needs to be. Music drifts from a jukebox that hasn't been tuned in years. Glasses clink. Laughter comes too fast, too sharp like it's trying to outrun something. The crowd is mixed tonight. Regulars, observers, a few faces that don't belong but are pretending they do. Bumpy Johnson arrives after the moment has already happened. That's important. He steps inside and the room adjusts itself without instruction. Chairs shift. Bodies make space. A conversation trails off mid-sentence and never finishes. Someone turns the music down a notch, then another, until the jukebox feels embarrassed for being on at all. Bumpy doesn't look around. He doesn't need to. The disrespect is still in the air, not fresh but present. Like smoke that refuses to leave after a bad decision. It came earlier. Everyone knows that too. A voice louder than necessary. A joke that leaned too far. A sentence delivered for witnesses, not for truth. The kind of remark meant to test whether silence still holds when it's challenged publicly. They didn't shout his name. They didn't have to. The line was simple, almost lazy. Guess some men confuse being quiet with being finished. Laughter followed. Nervous laughter. Encouraging laughter. the kind that wants to be on the right side of whatever comes next without knowing what that side is. Now the speaker sits at the bar, back straighter than before, drink untouched. He knows Bumpy is here. He hasn't turned around yet. He's waiting for the moment to arrive on him instead of the other way around. Bumpy takes a seat near the wall. Same distance as always. He doesn't acknowledge the bar, doesn't acknowledge the speaker. He sets his hat on the table beside him, careful, deliberate. That movement alone settles the room. People remember how to breathe quietly. This isn't about embarrassment, it's about witness. Public disrespect demands public balance, not noise, not spectacle, just enough correction that the room understands where the line is and who drew it. Authority is present tonight. Two officers stand near the door, pretending to watch the crowd while watching Bumpy instead. They don't intervene. They don't approach. They stay where they are, hands relaxed, posture neutral. They're here to observe. That's all they'll admit. Bumpy orders nothing. The bartender knows better than to ask. He places a glass of water near the table anyway. Bumpy doesn't touch it. Condensation forms, slides. Time announces itself again. The speaker finally turns. He sees Bumpy. His smile is immediate and wrong. Too wide, too eager. He raises his glass slightly, a half salute meant to look respectful without being submissive. It hangs there. Bumpy doesn't return it. The smile fades. That's when the room understands this isn't ending quickly. The speaker clears his throat and begins to talk not to Bumpy, but to the air. He repeats part of the joke, softer this time, framing it as misunderstanding, as humor taken the wrong way, as something meant for everyone, not anyone in particular. Bumpy lets him finish. Silence follows, not heavy, measured. Bumpy stands, not fast, not slow. The scrape of his chair is the only sharp sound in the room. He takes one step forward, then another, stopping just close enough to be seen but not crowded. He still doesn't look at the man. He looks past him. At the bar, at the bottles lined up like witnesses, at the mirror behind them, cracked at the corner, reflecting the room at an angle that hides nothing. Then he speaks. One sentence. You talk too loud for someone who doesn't want an answer. That's it. No insult. No threat. Just placement. The room reacts instantly, not with sound, but with understanding. The speaker opens his mouth, then closes it. He realizes, too late, that replying would only deepen the correction. Bumpy turns away before the moment can stretch into something else. That's restraint. He returns to his seat, puts his hat back on the table, sits. The conversation in the room doesn't resume. It rearranges itself around what just happened. Authority shifts uncomfortably. One officer glances at the other. A silent exchange passes between them. Nothing illegal has occurred. Nothing reportable. Words were spoken. No threats made. No action taken. They don't like moments like this. Moments that resolve themselves without leaving a mark. The speaker finishes his drink without tasting it. He sets the glass down too hard, then softens the movement halfway through. He signals for the check he doesn't need, pays immediately, leaves without looking back. No one follows him. They don't need to. Bumpy remains seated for a while longer. Long enough for the room to reset, for people to remember how to exist again. When laughter returns, it's quieter, smarter, shorter. He stands again. This time, no one moves. They've learned. Outside, the officers step aside without meaning to. Bumpy walks past them as if they aren't there. They watch him go. One of them reaches for a notebook, then decides against it. What would he write? That a man corrected a room with a sentence? That silence changed direction? That authority chose not to interfere because interference would have meant choosing a side? They let him leave. Inside, the bar exhales. The jukebox stays quiet. The disrespect doesn't linger this time. It's been addressed, not erased, understood. That's enough. By the time the speaker reaches the street, he already knows what the city will feel like tomorrow. He knows doors will open slower for him. Conversations will end sooner. Invitations will stop arriving without explanation. No punishment announced. No violence required. That's how public balance works when power is calm. Authority files the night away as uneventful. No arrests, no disturbances. A successful shift. They don't realize they've just witnessed a line being redrawn. Or maybe they do. They just don't say it. Bumpy Johnson disappears into the night without hurry. The city adjusts around him, loyal not because he demanded it, but because he reminded everyone what restraint looks like when it's backed by certainty. The disrespect is finished. The lesson remains. Nothing announces the change. No meeting is called. No message circulates. No warning arrives dressed as advice. The city simply tightens like a knot pulled once and left alone. Bumpy Johnson doesn't move loudly. He doesn't need to. Movement, for him, is a signal only when it's restrained. Tonight, he travels light. No entourage, no visible protection, just presence steady, unhurried, exact. He enters a building that doesn't carry a sign. The hallway smells of old paint and patience. A man at the desk looks up, then down again, as if acknowledging something he can't afford to make obvious. The elevator is already waiting. Inside, the doors close without a sound. The floor it stops on isn't crowded. That's intentional. Chairs line the wall, all occupied except one. The empty chair faces the room. It's been left that way on purpose. Bumpy doesn't sit. He stands near the doorway, hat in hand, eyes moving once across the faces present. He counts without counting. Measures without counting. Measures without measuring. The room understands the assessment and holds still. This isn't a confrontation. It's confirmation. A man begins to speak, then stops himself. He looks to someone else for permission that doesn't come. Authority in this room isn't procedural. It doesn't run on titles or votes. It runs on who can end a conversation by choosing not to start it. Bumpy remains silent. Minutes pass. Not awkwardly. Purposefully. The absence of instruction is the instruction. One by one, men begin to adjust. A sentence is withdrawn. A suggestion is abandoned mid-thought. Someone nods not to Bumpy directly, but to the understanding settling in the room. Decisions realign without being debated. This is domination without demand. Bumpy steps forward at last. Just one pace. Enough to close the distance without invading it. He sets his hat on the empty chair, then rests his hand on the backrest. He still doesn't sit. You already know what not to do, he says. His voice is calm, even, uninterested in drama. No one challenges it, because he's right. He doesn't outline consequences. He doesn't name names. He doesn't mention the insult, the pressure, or the noise that tried to find him earlier in the week. He doesn't have to. Those things are already being removed from the board. He adds one sentence, quiet, precise. Keep it that way. That's the climax, not a threat, a placement. The room absorbs it immediately. Men nod without smiling. Shoulders ease not in relief, but alignment. The empty chair remains empty. Bumpy leaves his hat there for a moment longer, then takes it back. The meeting ends without anyone declaring it over. Outside, authority waits. 2 cars, engines off, lights dark, officers leaning against doors, pretending they're on break. They watch Bumpy exit, their posture straightening without instruction. No one approaches him. No one asks questions. They've learned what restraint looks like when it's backed by control. One officer considers stepping forward, then doesn't. There's nothing to interrupt. No disturbance. No leverage. Only a man walking away from a building that will now behave differently. Bumpy passes them without acknowledgement. That's not disrespect. That's certainty. The officers exchange a glance. One shrugs, small and private. They turn their attention elsewhere. Paperwork can wait. Tonight doesn't need explanation. Tonight resolved itself. Back inside the city, doors open where they should, close where they must. Calls connect again. Conversations regain their proper length. Pressure dissolves not because it was defeated, but because it no longer has a direction to move in. By midnight, it's clear. The line has been redrawn. Not publicly, not loudly, permanently. Bumpy Johnson doesn't celebrate. He never does. He returns to his routine as if nothing happened because, to him, nothing unusual did. Calm domination isn't an event, it's maintenance. The city feels it settle into place like a weight redistributed. Balance restored without spectacle, control affirmed without blood. Authority prefers it this way. They always have. Silence did the work. Restraint delivered the message. And everyone who mattered understood it the first time. The city doesn't wake up all at once. It exhales. Morning light reaches Harlem the way it always has, careful, angled, respectful of the buildings that have seen too much to be impressed by another day. Storefronts open on schedule. Streetcars rattle past. People step into routine as if nothing has happened. That's how you know something has. Nothing needs correction anymore. Nothing needs testing. Bumpy Johnson hasn't been visible in days. That's not unusual. What's different is how little anyone tries to fill the space where noise used to be. The jokes stop arriving. The sideways comments lose their audience. Conversations learn where to end on their own. Time adjusts itself around him. Men who once leaned forward now lean back. Meetings shorten. Words become precise. The city doesn't feel tense, it feels instructed, as if a boundary has been quietly reinforced and no one wants to be the first to lean against it. Authority notices the calm and mistakes it for success. Reports show stability, fewer disturbances, no spikes, no names crossing desks that don't belong there. A supervisor signs off on a week's summary without comment. Another delays a request for additional patrols. Why stir water that's already settled? They don't say his name in those rooms. They don't need to. In Harlem, loyalty doesn't gather to celebrate. It disperses to protect. Shopkeepers keep an eye out for one another. Corners remain calm without enforcement. When arguments start, they end early. Not out of fear, out of understanding. This is what community looks like when it knows who holds the line. A man who once thought silence meant absence takes a longer route to work now. He doesn't explain why. He just feels better staying out of certain places. Another man decides to leave town for a while, tells people it's business. It is, but not the kind he planned. Consequences don't arrive dressed as punishment. They arrive as adjustment. Bumpy sits alone in the early morning, reading nothing, thinking nothing that needs to be spoken. The world doesn't press him for reaction anymore. It's learned. Silence has done its job and stepped back. That's legacy. Not the stories people tell later, not the myths that grow louder with time. Legacy is the behavior that changes when you're not there. Authority understands this better than they admit. They've seen men like Bumpy before. Not many, but enough to know when to step aside and let balance handle itself. Files remain thin. Testimony never materializes. Investigations lose momentum without explanation. No one says why. They don't want to write it down, because writing it would mean admitting that control doesn't always wear a badge or need a warrant. As spring edges closer, Harlem feels lighter. Not safer, not freer, just clearer. Lines are visible again. Respect has a shape people recognize. Violence remains possible but unnecessary. That's the point. Bumpy Johnson didn't raise his voice, didn't raise a hand, didn't make an example anyone could photograph. He let time do what it always does when guided correctly. Teach. Years from now, men will argue about what really happened during this stretch. Some will exaggerate, some will minimize. Authority will pretend it was coincidence. Others will swear nothing happened at all. But the city will remember the feeling, the week when silence became instruction, the days when restraint spoke louder than action, the moment time learned who it had to respect. Bumpy Johnson walks through Harlem unnoticed again, and that's the final proof. True authority doesn't need attention once it's understood. It just needs space, and Harlem gives it to him.